Are you smiling? Everybody.
Hey everyone, it is Friday night and it's 9 o'clock. So that means it's time for 30 minutes of the New Testament with Autumn and Joe. And we are thrilled to be able to be with you and to be here again tonight on Friday night. We hope your Friday is going really well. Hope you've had a good week. And we certainly had an eventful week in our world, in our community, and a big week. In fact, that in a very interesting way kind of ties into what we're going to be looking at tonight, and a number of the sections of scripture that we saw together. And so as you're logging in and getting ready to watch, just saying hi to people as you connect there. If you do have questions or comments about stuff that you read this past week, things that jumped out at you or that maybe struck you, if you have things that you want to share with us, go ahead and get those in the comment sections now on YouTube and on Instagram, and we'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. And hopefully, sounds like we have a little bit of a buzzing issue on the microphone. Hopefully that is going away, and we will find out if it is or not, I imagine. Yeah.
Hi, Lindsay, and who else do I see?
So,
Josie, Susie. Good to see you guys.
So, okay. Well, with that, I don't know if we'll do one more thing there. Apologize for my fingers getting in front of the camera. Unfortunately, the microphone cable is in a kind of an awkward spot, so I will check that again over here.
Hopefully it's better, Corey. He's checking it for us.
Yeah. So we'll see if it is or if it's not. Anyway, so let's jump in, and hopefully that's fixed. So again, a lot of ground that we covered this week. The part that stuck out to me as we were reading came in a little bit of the front part of the week. One of the sections of scripture that we read is in Matthew 23, and this is where a lot of end time stuff started coming out this week. If you were reading along with us, then you saw that. Matthew 23, Jesus starts this very long section of text that is headlined as the seven woes. And so these are not the way that Jesus says it, but this is the way I want you to hear this. Jesus reads it like this. He says, woe to those who do not enter the kingdom and by their lies prevent other people from entering as well. Woe to those who make comments and who lead converts to false religions. Woe to those blind guides who value symbols over sources. Woe to those who act righteously, but who oppress others, right? That one certainly struck out to me this past week, but when you have this, because this is being written to the Pharisees, right, very specifically. And
so they act righteously, but they oppress others.
Right, who act righteously and who act religiously, but then they use that righteousness or that status as a way of oppressing other people. And I couldn't help but hear the parallel and to see the parallel in our culture, in our world being lived out. And it's so interesting to me because I think so many times that the issue of racism and human rights and civil rights has come up, and it feels like finally it's getting the attention of the church that it deserves. And so I'm thankful for that. I mean, I know you are too, and I'm sure you are as well. But it's such a massive issue, and
I think we like to separate ourselves from the issue too, if we don't consider ourselves somebody that struggles with that. And yet, I don't know that that's loving our neighbor as much as.
It's interesting to me. Again, this goes, going back 2,000 years to the words of Jesus, to the people who were in the positions of religious power and religious authority, and even then, the call was to act righteously and to make sure that in doing that, you were not oppressing those who were with you and around you in society. And so I think it's just a reminder of the high calling that we have as people who carry the name of Jesus, that right from the very beginning, Jesus has always stood with the oppressed, and he stood for the oppressed, and he's always sought to bring equality to people who are oppressed, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. And for some reason, I don't really know why, to be honest. I don't know if it's being part of the establishment, if it's being a part of the majority, however you want to think about it. But I don't know what it is that about that idea, because I think all of us as individual followers of Jesus, I think we would all champion that idea. At least I hope we would, and say, absolutely, that's true. We believe that Jesus always stands with the oppressed, but yet for some reason, and I'm not smart enough to know exactly why this is, but for some reason, when that idea gets communicated into the larger sphere of Christendom or the church, oftentimes it's met with opposition. And I don't, is there an inherent, is that same thing that was inside the Pharisees of wanting to hold on to power and hold on to control, right? Is there just something so inherent about that in religion, right? That if we're not very careful to practice our followership of Jesus in a non-religious way, can we just get sucked right back into that?
And if we can separate out religion too, to what our comfort is. So our traditions, our preferences, I think our religion, our traditions, our preferences almost keep us contained in our little world. So it's not so much that we think of ourselves as actually oppressing, but we're just indifferent. Like we're just in our world. Yeah,
we just like what we like, and
they like what, and people like what they like, and then we're just separate, and so then we're unaware. And I don't know about unaware, but maybe we're able to. I think the word is deflect, and to be able to, I just spent all week just listening, and I feel like then we're talking tonight, I'm like, talking. I was listening more,
right.
And just hearing other people's perspectives. And I think that's really where I have to come at it, is like, maybe we don't see ourselves as oppressing so much, but if we're going to be loving, we have to be empathetic. And if we're going to be empathetic, we have to listen. And if we're going to listen, then we're going to be called to action. That's going to be important.
Absolutely.
And so it's not just enough not to oppress. It's like we have to not be comfortable in our religion.
Right.
Because in our religion is our comfort level, and we can't love our neighbors if we don't understand what they're going through.
Yeah.
And if we just deflect what they're going through and just ignore or fail to stand with them and for them.
Yeah, and again, the thing that grabbed me in all this is just that idea over and over that Jesus is always standing with the person who's being oppressed.
So that's
right. And so that, we have to stand there, right? Because I want to stand with Jesus, right? Of all the people to choose to stand with in this moment, I want to stand. I hope you want to stand where Jesus stands, because there is a lot of fear in this moment, right? For everybody, I think. There's the fear of the unknown. There's the fear that maybe things won't change, even though they need to change.
They need to change.
There's the fear that maybe what does change mean, and what does that mean? So there's all kinds of fear in a moment like this.
Yeah.
And yet, Jesus, we've heard this so many times in the last several weeks through our preaching and through our Bible readings on Friday nights. Do not fear, do not fear, do not worry. I am with you, right? And we hear these promises. And I think that, if we're honest with ourselves at some level, some of why we resist change is because we don't know what that change means. Yeah. And yet the promise from Jesus is he stands with the oppressed. And if I stand with Jesus, it doesn't matter what the change is, it doesn't matter because I'm going to be with him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's the fourth woe. Jesus continues and he says, woe to those who try to look righteous, but who are greedy and selfish. Woe to those who try to be perfect on the outside, but on the inside they're full of sin and death. And woe to those who repeat, and this is again, just who repeat the sins of their forefathers, right? Woe, that's the way he ends the seventh woe, who repeats the sin of their forefathers. And then he gives very specific context for in his moment, saying, killing the prophets, right? And yet we can't miss that, right? The woe to those who repeat the sins of their fathers. In Jesus' day, killing the prophets. In our day, repeating the sins of our fathers as well. And so that was, Matthew 23, and that was on day 36. So that was.
Yeah, I think if Jesus says woe to things, I think we better pay attention.
Yeah. So if you missed, depending on where you're at in your reading, if you missed a couple days, if you're catching up, day 36, day 37, day 38 this past week, lots of stuff having to do with end times and trials and tribulations and all the fear of the unknown. And it was, just very, very interesting how, the timing of such would be happening in the middle of this week as we're experiencing all that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that is so important. And I don't think it's not surprising to me that we're on that place and when we're reflecting there and it applies to what we're going through. And so many times that happens to me when I'm studying the Bible, something God is speaking to me through and it applies to something I'm going through at that moment. And it's really important that we pay attention to that.
Yeah. And then I wanted to say one more thing about this whole, just kind of, because whenever you read the end time stuff, and sometimes in culture you hear end time stuff and you think, okay, yeah, that's going to happen one day, someday kind of stuff. And then there's other days in culture because of everything that's going on.
You're like, it's now.
Right. You hear that and it's like, it's now. And so to go from COVID and pandemic and what all of us have been experiencing dealing with these last 3 months, and to move from COVID to massive unrest throughout our society and our culture, right? Again, and it might be just me. So if I'm reading my own mail, then I apologize.
No, people have said it to me too, for sure.
You hear this stuff and you think, okay, like what, you're trying to get our attention, God. You've got my attention, at least for a few minutes. What is it that you want to tell me? And so as I was listening and again, reading through this, a couple things jumped out. And so, we're not going to go into all of this stuff in real great depth, but some thoughts that I wanted to share with you, especially as you're looking, because whenever end time stuff comes up, people always want to know, okay, tell me when, tell me how, what do we know, what do we don't know? A couple things I would tell you to really pay attention to, especially in these particular chapters when we're looking at the end times. And this is really, Mark 13, this is Matthew 23, this is Matthew 24. There's a parallel account in Luke 21 that wasn't in this part of the reading, but we've covered it other times. And the thing that is really important whenever you're reading this, and we've touched on this in a little bit, but whenever you're coming up with end time stuff, especially, it's because you want to read yourself into the text, but you got to ask two questions. What part of this text is information, and what part of this text is instruction? Right? So that's the first thing you want to think about is information versus instruction. And then you need to ask the questions of, okay, so who is acting in the text? If it's God acting, then it's information, right? If the disciples are being called to act, then for them, and this is the hard part, and this is where sometimes we get confused, because Jesus may be calling the disciples to act, and so for them it's instruction, but for us it's still just information. Yeah, because
the disciples are separate from us.
Right. So again, we are disciples, right? We are disciples, but again, we have to remember this is, Jesus is giving these final words to his 12 in real time. And so for them, he's giving information, but he's also giving instruction. And then there are parts of the text which continue to remain instructional for us.
Right.
And that's really important to differentiate. And if you can read through it that way, and you can kind of think about, okay, where's the information coming, and then where's the instruction coming? What is Jesus telling me to do, right? Then that helps us to break it down. And there's a lot of debate. Part of this section that we covered, we bumped into this whole idea of the abomination that causes desolation, which is just,
big words.
Big words and very, intrusive words.
Yeah, like, can I not be here for that? Can I just go to heaven?
What does that
first?
even mean, right?
Yeah.
And and most scholars would tell you, and this is what kind of sounds weird, that's a who, it's not a what.
Right.
The way it's written in English, it sounds like it's a thing.
Yeah. For sure.
But it's not a thing. It's a who. And some people read this as being, in Jesus' disciples' future, but our past. And other people read this as being in Jesus' disciples' future and in our future, which again gets back to the issue of, is it instructional or is it informational? And if you read it as it's in our past, then you're probably not scared by these things because you know they already happened. And we know that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. We know that the Jewish nation ceased to exist in 70 AD, that it doesn't exist the way that it's described in the Bible anymore even. And so if you see it as a past event, then you're probably not scared about it. But if you read this and you're thinking that this is a future event, then you might be scared, right? Mm-hmm. Then that's something that might cause you to have some fear. And this is where I think even Jesus' specific words are so important as a reminder to us, because he tells us even in verse 7, he says, don't be alarmed, right? This is his instructions to us. He says, don't be alarmed. Yeah. In verse 11, he goes on and he says, don't be worried, right? Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid. And then in Luke 21, he gives this great statement at the end, which is actually one of the few commands in this whole section of scripture. And he actually says, straighten up and lift your heads, for the day of your redemption is near, mm-hmm. right? And when he says straighten up, it isn't like get your act together. It is a stand up and don't be afraid, because the day that you've been finally waiting for has arrived. Your redemption is here. This is a moment to celebrate. And we don't think about end times that way, right? Mm-hmm. We don't, but that's the truth as followers of Jesus, is we're actually waiting for that to happen. The promise, even if we see all these things as being in the future and we're afraid of them, the promise is we won't go through them alone. Jesus is with us. He says, don't worry. I am with you. Don't be afraid. I am with you. Stand up, lift your head up, because your redemption is here. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be with you, and we're going to be together. Right. And so, so if the end times, if that scares you, this is the warning part. If you're afraid of it, you might focus on it. And if you focus on it, it's going to lead you to trying to predict it. And this is why Jesus himself says, don't do that, because mm-hmm. not even I know when it's going to happen. It's going to be the Father, right? He's the only one who knows. And so this is why Jesus doesn't give us that information, because he doesn't want us to focus on that. What he wants us to focus on is, don't worry, don't be afraid. I'm with you. Lift your head up, straighten up. The day of your redemption is near.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I took comfort in those verses, like don't be afraid, and I love that. I love that I know the tone of voice he says that in. Mm-hmm. It isn't right.
It's not scolding.
Yeah.
It's not
loving
condemning.
It's loving. Like he knows we're going to be afraid. He's encouraging us not to be afraid, because redemption is coming. It's an encouragement.
That's right.
Which is good to know. Which kind of flows into what I'm going to talk about today too. So I'm going to go through John 14, 15, 16, and 17. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all of it. But I just want to say that following all this and everything we've gone through, I think if you don't get to all the reading, I would go back and read John 14, 15, 16, and 17.
Yeah, that's today's mm-hmm. passages. If you're with us live right now, this is today's reading, are these 4.
Yeah, and John 17, I mean, that is my favorite chapter in the Bible, because Jesus prays for himself and he prays for us. And I think it's just so beautiful to hear what he prays before he goes to the cross. And that's so important. So this whole week, it took us through Peter denying Jesus. It took us to him praying in Gethsemane and the disciples falling asleep. And so if you've ever felt abandoned by your friends, that's a good passage to read in Gethsemane. If you feel like why can't people just help me and support me? I'm going through so much right now, and I just need encouragement. And here Jesus is asking the disciples to pray for him, and they fall asleep. And now I think that's anguish and in extreme pain. And so,
and it is, in fact, mm-hmm. And I'm just going to jump in on here because it kind of struck me. One of the things that gets missed in this a lot is the word Gethsemane. It literally translates as olive press, right? It's the garden of the olive press, mm-hmm. right? So, I mean, think about this picture for a second. What do you do in an olive press, right? That's where you bring the olives and you press them to get the oil out of them. Mm-hmm. Well, all through the scripture, the Holy Spirit is equated with oil, mm-hmm. right? This is not a mistake. So in the Garden of the Olive Press, where the oil is pressed out, right? When the essence is pressed out of the olive, the most important part, the husk is discarded, and the olive oil is the part that is used for fuel, it's used for food, or it's used for baking, right? That's where the most important part is captured. It's in the Garden of Gethsemane, in the Garden of the Olive Press, where Jesus is pressed, literally, right? Luke tells us he sweats drops of blood in that moment, and the life is pressed out of him, and that's where we are receiving the most important thing that Jesus has to offer us. It's in that garden, that pressing that takes place.
Yeah, the only time I've ever fallen asleep due to just being overwhelmed was labor.
Yeah.
So I was in labor, remember that?
Yeah,
I was laboring
with
Joe, and his cord was wrapped around his neck, so we didn't know why my labor was taking so long, but that
20 hours.
It was a long time, and so I would just fall asleep in between contractions. And so when I read this and the disciples fell asleep, and just that they're praying, I believe they started praying.
Yeah.
But I think it was just knowing that they were told, Jesus told them he would die. I think it was just too much for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's an important thing to realize too, is sometimes when we want people to stand in the gap for us and to stand in that place, there's times that only God can reach us in that place. And you're going to feel very disappointed by people, and you're going to feel abandoned. But those people are just human, and there's no way they can touch that pain. The only person can is Jesus. And, and to be able to find him in that place and lament is just such an important thing in our walk with God. And I think that's true maybe collectively right now, after going through COVID, with what we're facing right now, with trying to love our neighbors and to love people that are oppressed, and maybe that aren't people that we have as best friends. I mean, maybe you don't know somebody who is who's African American and Black. You need to try to get to know somebody, but if you don't, I think then maybe it can feel so distant, but I know that people love each other. And so the call here is to pray and to anguish with, and to be with the way that you would want somebody to be with you in your pain. It struck me the most when Nathan was leaving the house at one point, and I said to him, "Where are you going?" I'm going to get choked up. And I said, "Honey, I need you to tell me where you're going," because I needed to just know, with everything that's going on, where his location was going to be. And I thought, I really don't worry about him going out because of the color of his skin.
Right.
And all the moms out there that have to let their teenagers, and dads, scary enough, let them go out for the evening with their friends and drive a car. And to think that you have to think about their color of their skin affecting their safety is just not right. And we have to change. Right. We have to change.
That's right.
We do.
And that is one of those thoughts that when you let that roll around in your head for a little bit, right? Yeah. And you really, because I think the truth is, most of us, for me as a Caucasian man, that is one of those thoughts that if I let that creep in for a little bit, that is fundamentally, in a very small picture, describes the reason why there needs to be change, and the reason why there needs to be support given in this situation, especially for our African American community, but for anyone who fears that they're going to be the victim of violence simply because they look different than the people that they live next to. That is a overwhelming emotional thought.
Yeah, and I think that's so important for us. I mean, obviously, we covered the greatest commandment this week, too.
Yeah.
That we're to love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love our neighbors as ourselves. And it's like the love of neighbors as ourselves is a call to sacrifice, because that's what Jesus did.
And yeah, right. And then Jesus, if we missed it, and he defines that and says, and specifically, love each other the way I have loved you.
Right.
Right. The one who was pressed out for us.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Love
laid
one
his
another.
life down. Yeah.
Like the way that I have in the garden of the pressing.
Mm-hmm.
The way I've pressed out my life, you're to press out your life for each other. And it's like, wow, that is, if that doesn't strike you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
So what
just-
does that mean for us in
Right.
any area of leadership that we have to speak up, to stand in the gap, to be there? And I think just to listen to the stories of people that are in anguish.
Yeah.
And even though it's hard and it's easier just to not, and to deflect that and to say, well, I'm not oppressing somebody.
Right.
But to hear that and to anguish with people.
Right. And that
so
is such an understandable response, right? I'm not oppressing anyone, but that is the sin of omission,
Mhm.
right? Because there's the idea of I do certain things that are sinful, but then I also do things that are sinful by failing to act when I am required to act. When the question is, what does love require of me? Right? When you ask that question,
Right.
and there is an answer that is given, and we don't answer the question that is being asked of us, then that is sin. That is sin. It is a failure to love mercy and to act justly and to walk humbly with our Lord. Right? This is Old Testament. This is
Micah 6:8.
That's right. That's old. This is Old
Yeah.
Testament. So this is not a new idea at all.
Mhm.
It's it is the thread that moves through the pages of the gospel from Genesis to Revelation. It's that idea.
So John 14, Jesus comforts the disciples and he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. This always reminds me of Mexicali, Big, Big House. It's a great song. If you don't know it, look it up.
That song stopped being sung before these people were born.
I'm so sorry. I'm dating myself. We used to go to Mexicali on a mission trip and we'd sing it outside. I love
Yes.
worship outside
Yes.
and Big, Big House. I just really wish we could sing it again. So,
Greatest hits of the
nostalgia
90s.
of the
That's what
90s.
that is.
All right. Well,
Yes.
anyways, so Jesus is telling them, and he's comforting them, obviously, that he is going to prepare a place and that they will eventually be with him, which is going to comfort them through, obviously, they're martyred. So, except for John. So I think that they must have taken comfort in that all the way. And then it goes on, it says, Jesus says, I am, and this is verse 6, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really knew me, you would know the Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And the reason I think this is so important right now, I am the way, the truth, and the life, is because nobody knows where to find truth. We're like, oh, okay, I can't watch the news because it's biased.
Right.
Who am I going to listen to? One person says this is true. Another person says this is true about COVID, about,
Right.
The protests. Right. It just depends on who you listen to. So where is truth? And Jesus says, I am.
Right.
I am.
Right.
I'm the way. I'm the truth and the life.
Yep.
And it's like, that is your source of truth. Jesus is your source of truth. It's a person. It's not a social media platform. It's not. Jesus is the source of truth. So that's your
Which
rudder.
is why standing with Jesus is the most
Always.
important thing. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, wherever he is where we want to be.
Yeah, because otherwise mob rule, right? So
Right.
Jesus comes into the city.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a triumphal entry and everyone is cheering him on.
Yeah.
And then just a few days later, he's crucified and the mob is calling for his death. So we have to say, okay, I have to listen to Jesus. And so Jesus stands with the oppressed right now. That's so important for us to hear. Where would Jesus be in any situation?
Right.
He would be compassionate and he would be empathetic and he would be loving and he would be standing up
Yep.
for truth, which is we're all
And-
created equal and we are all one human race. It's
Right.
humankind and we're all together. It's not where one person wins the game, right? It's the type of game where we have to all win for the game
Mhm.
to be won. And so we're all in it together. So I think that's really important. And then the last part is John 17, which is, like I said, my favorite. And it said, and Jesus prays for himself, and then he prays for us. And it says, I have revealed, it is, again, verse 6, I have revealed you to those whom you gave me out of the world. So he's saying to the Father, I've revealed you to the world. They were yours, and you gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. Now they know that everything you have given me comes from you. For I gave them the words you gave me, and they accepted them. I'm trying to skip to the part. It's the end. I'm sorry. Verse 20, my prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message. So that's us. That all of them will be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. So that the world may believe that you have sent me. And like that, we have to be one.
Right.
And we can't be divided on okay, I'm going to get personal, whether to wear masks or whether not to wear masks, or whether, to protest or whether not to protest, or whether, these are the things that are dividing, and we can't let those things divide us. We have to say, what is truth? Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so we have to be loving and compassionate and kind and generous to each other. And we have to hear each other's stories, because everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And there's a reason we actually make decisions based on our experience. That's faulty. But if we're going to be compassionate to somebody that has a different opinion than us, we should listen to what their opinion is and find out, why did they come to that opinion? Probably they've had an experience.
Yep.
And so if we can be compassionate, maybe we have a chance to have a conversation with them. And maybe they are wrong, but maybe we could just be compassionate and say, well, there's a reason they have come to that decision.
Yeah, and it's really important to not, use somebody else's experience to justify your behavior too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big deal too.
Yeah, but I think if we're going to actually have this conversation, or any conversation where people come down on two sides, and we're not unified,
right?
It starts out with listening.
Right, absolutely. And that's what I'm not saying we shouldn't listen. I'm saying to understand that someone's experience is their experience.
Mm-hmm.
So if you dismiss that, right, if you invalidate that somehow, that's incredibly, it's by saying, well, okay, that might be your experience, but I haven't done that, or that might be your experience, but I'm not responsible for your experience. Right? That's all very dismissive and hurtful, and not how Jesus interacted.
Right. Right. And I think that's where, if we're going to keep seeking God, we have to just have those conversations and continually say, where would Jesus be?
That's right.
So what kind of questions do we have? Anything?
Well, I'm not sure if we've got...
we got a lot of waves.
Yeah, a lot of waves. And
let's see.
Well, if you have any questions before we say goodnight for tonight, go ahead and throw those in. Or if you have any comments that you want to share with everybody, make sure you get those typed into the chat box or the comments section on Instagram or on YouTube, and we will do that.
We'll scroll.
Bonnie, thank you. We love you too, and glad that you're able to be with us. And I'm glad that hopefully this is helping you to not only to go through the New Testament each day, or pretty often, maybe not every day, but most days. And hopefully you're getting a chance maybe to jump into certain sections and learn more about it, or to think through some things differently than maybe you have before.
Yep.
So
I think everybody's just saying thank you and
I
waving.
think so too. Well, we'll wave back, and
Good night, you guys.
have a great night, and we'll see you next Friday.
Take care.
God bless.
Bye.